Hello, everyone. Um, Thanks for joining us. I just wanted to take a moment to thank the conference sponsors. So we have Pain BC, the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research, the Chronic Pain Network, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, the Partnership for the Engagement of Patients with Pain Research Project, PEPPER, and Health Canada. Many of our presenters will be sharing stories and perspectives shaped by their individual experiences, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Pain Canada or our sponsors. And just remember that these sessions are being recorded and will be available after the conference on Pain Canada's YouTube channel. So welcome to the second session for today. It's caregiving and chronic pain. And just please be reminded that today's session will be recorded, as I mentioned, and we also have a French interpreter and closed captions available for you.
Yeah.
Um, and if you go in the bottom of your screen, you can click CC and it will close caption the session for you. So I'm very grateful to be here today. My name is Delane Linkowicz. My pronouns are she, her. I am a PT steering committee member, and I'm going to be moderating the caregiver and pain session today. I know we're joining from all over Canada, but for me personally today, I am joining from Guelph, Ontario, which I wanted to acknowledge as the stolen and unceded land and traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Ottawa and Huron, and the Haudenosaunee people in the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'm really grateful that I get to care for others and moderate today on these lands. And so just to get started here, I wanted to start with some introductions for our amazing panelists that we have joining us today. So first, we have Michelle Wan. Michelle is a loving caregiver to two children, one of which lives with medical complexities, and Michelle is also a fierce advocate. And then she is going to be talking today about her talk, which is entitled Victim, Hero, or Persevering, a caregiver's perspective of how social labels create barriers for people living with pain. Second, we have Charisse Lane. Charisse is a dedicated advocate for those living with chronic pain. She wears many hats, one of which being a caregiver with chronic pain to her husband. And she'll be talking about her talk entitled Caring Without Disappearing, Balancing My Partner's Needs and My Own Pain. And then we also have Tanis Laird. Tanis is a caregiver to many as a grief worker, as well as a caregiver for two bio and two bonus children. So we're really, really grateful today to have these three amazing souls join us. And I just also wanted to quickly acknowledge that this is a really vast and important topic. So we won't get through everything today, but we hope to really just kind of spark some thoughts and conversations. We will be doing Q&A kind of towards the end of the panel, but feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A chat, and I'll make sure to get to them later in the panel. So I'm going to pass it along to Michelle to start and introduce the topic and role of caregiving and supporting those living with chronic pain. Pass it over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Delane. Delane mentioned that I am a mother of two. I have a son who is 15 years old, and I have a daughter. Her name is Chloe, and that's the person I caregive for. Chloe has been living with pain pretty much all her life, and she just turned 17 a couple of weeks ago. She had her first life-saving surgery at birth. She's had 19 other surgeries since then. She lives with chronic pelvic pain. She also has daily procedural pain. So she has a 3-hour procedure that she needs to sustain her life. I call it procedural pain, but because it's every day, it's kind of chronic acute procedural pain. And she also has migraines. So lots of different types of pain. Today, what I'm really going to focus on is the barriers. So initially, we really found the barriers about how do we talk about pain? How do we describe pain? Is it dull? Is it achy? Is it stabbing? Is it throbbing? These words sort of didn't really mean anything to her. because you could choose basically any word to describe pain. For her, it's just pain.
Oh, sorry, can we just pause for 1 second?
Yeah. Did you want me to keep going, Caroline?
Yeah, just one
Yeah.
second. They got unassigned when I changed. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So we really found it difficult to find the words to describe pain, because we were asked to just choose words. We were also asked to describe pain in a numerical scale, which meant nothing to my daughter. And really what was missing was the function and the emotion. There's a huge emotion on the patient's part as well as the caregiver, just watching your loved one in pain. So that was the initial barrier. But as we moved along in her pain journey, I realized that the true barrier for us was really how society acts around pain, how they react to pain. People have all sorts of opinions on what pain should look like. What should you look like when you're in pain? Oh, you don't look like you're in pain, so therefore maybe your pain is not as much. Um, and I find that in pediatrics, we really put children with medical issues into two buckets. You're either a victim, poor you, you're suffering, or you're a hero. Oh, you're so brave, and you've persevered, you've beat this challenge, and you're so brave. And really, I find that that is what the barrier is, because we're not really talking about pain in an authentic way. People who are just persevering. You're neither a victim, you're neither a hero, and you're persevering in your daily life through a pain. And I think I'm going to be talking more about this in my talk about why I think this is the main barrier um, about pain. So that's my introduction.
Thanks, Michelle. Now we're going to pass it along to Therese.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Jelaine. And I'm Therese. I live with chronic pain, and I'm also a caregiver to my husband. I'm actually very grateful to be with you today in a space where people understand the complexity of living with pain and how much more complicated life becomes when you're caring for someone else at the same time. Before I go further, I want to offer a gentle content note. I'll be speaking about the emotional impact of caregiving, including mental health challenges. Please take care of yourself in whatever way you need as you listen. When you live with pain yourself and care for someone you love, there's a unique layer of challenges that many people don't see or understand. I want to name a few of these barriers, not to weigh us down, but to validate what so many of us carry quietly. As I share, notice if any of these feel familiar to you too. Starting with the physical limitations. When your body is already in pain, even small tasks can feel huge. Things like helping with daily activities, appointments, or household needs take more energy from us than others realize. Sometimes I wake up hurting before the day has even started, and that's before I tend to someone else's needs. There's the guilt of not doing enough. There's often a quiet, constant guilt that whispers, I should be doing more. Even when we are doing everything we possibly can, we question ourselves. I question myself, and on the days when our pain forces us to slow down, that guilt can grow louder. Feeling responsible all the time. Many of us carry a deep sense of responsibility, always like we must be on alert for the person we care for. That emotional vigilance is exhausting, and it can feel like we can never fully rest. There's a loss of identity. Little by little, caregiving took over the space where my own life used to exist. My roles, my hobbies, my dreams slowly shrank. I became the caregiver while the parts of me that once lit me up faded into the background. Isolation, because both pain and caregiving are draining, it becomes harder to socialize, make plans, or stay connected. And people may not understand why you just can't get out more. Isolation can creep in until one day I realized how small my world had become. There's a strain on the relationship. Caring for someone that you care about will change the relationship in ways no one prepares you for. The roles shift, the balance changes. Some days I lose sight of where the partner ends and the caregiver begins. Then there's the emotional burnout. Caring while in pain means I'm pouring from a cup that's already not full. It's common to reach emotional exhaustion and yet still feel like you can't stop to refill because someone relies on you. And always being seen as the wrong one. When you're a caregiver, people often focus on the person you care for and they assume you're okay. Your pain, your exhaustion, your mental and emotional needs can become invisible. Even healthcare providers sometimes look past the caregiver as if we're just support, not someone who needs support too. But I do have techniques to deal with this, which I will talk about later. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Therese. Tanis, we'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Delane, and thanks, Therese and Michelle. I'm Tanis. I'm over in Snuneymuxw territory, unceded stolen land. That's also known as Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. And I'm here to share some of my experiences as a caregiver, not only personally, but professionally, as well as a parent and someone in pain. I have a little bit written down here, so I'm just going to read that off and see how that goes. I'm someone who has experienced a lifetime of health challenges, illnesses, and grief. And as a parent, as well as a creative contractor and professional caregiver, I took my end-of-life doula training in autumn of 2019. And everything was extremely different by spring 2020. This is an ongoing COVID pandemic, and this has changed my life professionally and personally. The trajectory for my death work has been impacted by this. So I don't do in person so much, I'm online. Because of my health issues, I've had to make a lot of big, different choices. I had to learn about public health and safety really, really fast and what true community care looks like and the complexities of social constructs and contracts. This is all in regards to keeping or not keeping others safe and healthy. And this current pandemic has made it clear to me how crucial mutual aid is, care companions are, and disability justice. This is all in order for all of us to keep caregiving. I work with a lot of people now that grapple with grief because grief comes from everywhere, and the pandemic has brought a lot of that to the surface. What we're dealing with in society now is a denial of grief. And I think the sooner we all address the grief in our life and process it with beloveds and caregivers, the better we are as a society. So I've tried to transmute all of this, all these like really many lived experiences into a supportive space for others. Caregivers are absolutely some of the most undernourished and under-resourced folks, and this creates a chain reaction of harm because if we, the caregivers, are burnt out, disabled folks, children, the elderly, and many other vulnerable people in society pay for that burnout. A lot of this is unpaid work, most of this is unpaid work. Those of us who have the privilege of having this as paid work, it's also another additional complex role to carry in society. So in my work, I speak about care for the caregiver. That came up so many times just as myself as someone in this role, trying to manage my own children and their own complex needs, as well as my own. So I need to give absolute full credit to Indigenous cultures all over the world for reminding me and teaching me and us how community care is really done. And I am just mere mortal trying to emulate those deep and potent practices. As a settler on this land, especially, I try to maintain a humility and a consciousness of my impact in this work. So as a primary parent, I've tried to continue to learn and educate myself in these places and spaces and understand cultural humility and respect. I've also trained over the years just to build in these skill sets to make sure that I can show up in the ways that I needed in the past, as much as I can show up for others the way they need in these complex places of grief, while caregiving, while in pain. So I've trained as a postpartum food doula. Nourishing food is a really big privilege in this world. I've trained as sex ed education and doula. I've been a facilitator in the past. I've worked as a children's art teacher online and in person. Grief writing. I'm building my counseling skills and working on some peer support work. So I just keep trying to bring in as many empathy-based knowledge sets that I can have in my life to be able to show up for others while I'm in pain, while I'm caregiving, and while I can try to understand and relate as best as I can to others who are being vulnerable enough to show up in that space. So I thank all of you who are here right now. And so, yeah, I'm just want to keep advocating and supporting and just really want to keep spreading that around so we can support others as caregivers as well as ourselves in this. So as we go along in this panel, I have a few slides that I'll share with a couple of tricks and tips, and also invite you all to look into the world of death work and end-of-life doulas and palliative care, because yes, this is a scary space. That's a scary word, death. And I'm not trying to bring any kind of taboo, but the more we practice showing up in these hard spaces, these inevitably hard spaces, the better we are to go through life together in these challenging times to support one another. So I have a whole other spiel about that, and I'm looking forward to sharing space with all of you to do that with. So thank you.
Thanks, Janice. And thank you, everybody, for sharing, your perspectives on caregiving. Before we proceed, I just wanted to let everybody know that we're aware that we're experiencing some difficulties with our Q&A option. And what we're going to do is we're going to open the chat to be able to send messages to our panelists closer to the end of the session. So if you could just hold tight on those questions that you have. And then we'll pop them you'll be able to pop them into the chats closer to the end of the session. We just ask, please only post questions versus comments. We do have a survey at the end where you can post your comments if you'd like. And by only posting questions, it allows myself and our panelists to make sure that we can get through as many of those awesome questions as possible. So thanks for your patience with that. So now we've heard from Michelle, Therese, and Tanis that they have some thoughts around maybe some key solutions or more proactive prevention strategies or approaches that they'd like to share. So we're gonna start with Michelle, who's going to start that conversation off.
Yeah, before I begin, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that Therese and Tanis had mentioned. Therese had talked about the isolation and how caregivers are not recognized. And Tanis mentioned about how a lot of this work is unpaid. I'm actually in Ottawa right now. I'm at another conference. I'm at the Canadian Caregiving Summit here in Ottawa, presented by the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. They just created a national strategy for caregiving. And what has struck me is looking at the differences between the pediatric world and the adult world. Both worlds, I think caregivers are ignored. In the adult world, they're not considered part of the team. They're totally ignored. It's very patient-centered. The opposite is true in pediatrics, to the point where I didn't realize I was a caregiver. I was expected to do actual nursing. And it was funny, I was mentioning that I was doing nursing. They're like, oh, you had a young baby. I'm like, no, nursing, catheter insertion, G-tube feeding, that kind of stuff. I was expected to do that, but I was never called a caregiver. I was just mom. That's just part of the work. So it's vastly different where I'm part of the nursing team basically for my daughter, whereas in the adult world, they're totally shut out. But in both worlds, there isn't that recognition of caregiver. So I just wanted to say that. So getting back to the main theme of my talk, which is these labels and the barriers that they create for people living with pain. In the pediatric world, we see examples of this everywhere in media, TV shows, fundraisers for hospitals, when we talk with our coworkers, and we see this in patient care. Often when we talk about pain, we're being pressured and asked to talk about it in a way that makes others feel better about it. And typically the way that makes others feel better is to put them in the bucket of you're a victim or you're a hero. And when you're the victim, there's always this need to sort of resolve that conversation. Nobody wants to just be like, okay, you're in pain and that's terrible. It's like, but well, you have a really good healthcare team. Well, it looks like you have that. There's always this need to resolve. And that's often to make the other person feel better about the person in pain. Examples in the healthcare system, I just felt enormous pressure, and I know I did this as a caregiver, to play into that brave role, that my daughter should be a brave hero. For example, when you get an IV, there's going to be pain associated with it. There is a numbing gel you can put on your arm that will address some of the pain. But sometimes if people are in a hurry, my daughter would be asked to forego that. They'd be like, okay, well, it's faster. Let's just do the IV. If you could be a brave girl. And I did not want to be the bad parent, and she did not want to be the bad patient. So we played into this. As her caregiver, I said, okay, just be brave, Chloe, just be brave. And so she was brave. She put on the brave face. She had her IV. And what this taught her to be silent, not only about her IV pain, but about all pain, to the point where she thought it was more important to play that role of being the brave hero than to talk about the pain. That was more important in the hospital. So and I felt extremely guilty as her caregiver when I realized that this was happening. I think she was 10 years old when she told me. She said, Mommy, I just thought that all kids who have medical things, they're just in pain all the time. And I said, no, you shouldn't be in pain all the time. And why haven't you told me? And she didn't think it was of any significance to tell her, or to tell her team, or to tell me about all of her pain. And it was just really a terrible feeling to realize that she had been suffering in silence. So luckily for us, we live in Toronto, which is a big city, lots of teaching hospitals, and we have access to chronic pain specialists, to the experts for pediatrics. But what I want to say to this is just having access is not necessarily, it doesn't translate into solutions, because she had so many different types of pain. So headaches, even though they're chronic, they're everyday, that's sort of outside the scope of chronic pain expertise team. Her procedural pain, which she did experience every day, again, that was outside of the scope of the type of pain that they were dealing with. Eventually, we were referred to the experts on the procedure, and they tried to make it more efficient, more effective. But when it came to the pain, when there were no answers, they sort of had to resort to that hero role. And they said, well, you know, she's a real trooper. She's so brave. And what I say to that is the solution to pain is not being brave. That's not the solution to that. That's just a way to sort of maybe make the healthcare team feel better. Pain isn't inevitable. I think if you're experiencing pain, you're always worthy and deserving of care and support. And it's really these barriers, these labels, these buckets we put people in, the lack of systemic supports. We kind of let these labels distract us as a substitute for better pain research, better pain supports for patients and their caregivers, better solutions at the system level. It's easier just to resort to, oh, you're so brave, and these people are so brave. So with that, I do think it is important to break out of these stereotypical roles. We need to start telling the stories of pain in an authentic way. It might not be inspiring, like for a fundraising campaign. It might be uncomfortable, and they might not be, the type of thing, I think it's important to just be able to normalize talking about pain in an authentic way. And to call it out. So the other day, Chloe was asked to review a comfort resource around surgery, and there was a whole page about affirmations about how to be brave. What if you don't want to be brave? What if you're in pain and you just don't feel like being brave that day? And so she's going to start speaking out and saying, let's delete that page, because you don't always have to be brave. So once Chloe, she's 17 now, she became aware of these labels and the pressure, and she stopped seeing herself as I'm no longer a brave hero. She gave herself permission not to be brave all the time. And sometimes she does want to seek out a solution. And me as her caregiver, if she doesn't have a lot of energy that day, that's okay. She comes to me where she's at. If we want to start looking for solutions, I'm along. Sometimes I'll do it. You don't have to come along. You can just be yourself. And I just want her to know that there's always someone in her corner to meet her where she's at with the energy level, because I can't imagine being in the level of pain that she's in, trying to do all this work alone. And I just want her to know that I'm there for her. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share some of her drawings. She found it really hard to talk about pain, so she eventually just started showing her teams her drawings, because it was a lot easier for her to talk about. So here's the thing. Can everyone see this? Okay. So this first drawing, she drew this when she was 8 years old. She uses drawing as a way to both cope with pain and to talk about pain, or you don't have to use words. This on the left here, this is Belle from Beauty and the Beast. And she was talking, this was before when she was hiding the pain. And I said, why is Belle so sad? And she said, well, Belle was attacked by the beast, and that's why she's crying here. And she always drew eyes, like empty eyes that were crying. This is sort of her feeling of what it's like to just, when you're in a pain flare, there aren't words, there isn't throbbing and stabbing. It's all encompassing. You're drowning in it. And, you're not able to even come up with words when you're feeling like this. So this was her way of showing, okay, this is what it's like to be in pain. This next one, she drew this last year. This was her self-portrait. So she has this fascination with statues, and this is her depicted as a statue because society, you can't be screaming at school. She would hold and hide in the pain and assume this very stoic stance. So this is her depicted as a statue because she feels like this is sort of the mask that she needs to put on every day. And a lot of teachers, they would be like, oh, I can't get a reading on her. I don't know if she's liking the class or if she's getting, I said, because she's just, all her energy is going to, to like not be crying and screaming in pain. That's where her energy is going because she's in pain all the time. And this last one, this is, I sort of relate to this one the most as her caregiver because this is like a depiction of the healthcare system. You're not seen. You have to go to the body part. Like if it's your leg that's in pain, you see the person who's in charge of that. If it's this part that's in pain, you see the person. You're never seen as a whole patient. And if you have different types of pain all around your body, there isn't that whole person care thing. And I feel like as her caregiver, I'm sort of the only one in her corner looking at Chloe as a whole person, and looking at how all those different types of pains that she has in interplay. And I'm really the central person who's trying to talk to this person and this person and this person, trying to get her whole person care. So that's me.
Thanks, Michelle. Those images, every time I see them, they're just so powerful. So I really appreciate you sharing your own experiences as well as Chloe's through that like more creative form. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to invite Therese to speak about your kind of ideas for kind of dealing with those barriers that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, first I'd like to thank Michelle for sharing her daughter's drawings. They express much more than a 1 to 10 pain scale, that's for sure. Anyways, I've made some notes because so it'll keep me on track and about the some of the techniques that I have come up with to help me and my husband get through our lives. So the first technique I was thinking about was self-compassion. One of the most important things that helps me is self-compassion, especially on the days where I feel like I'm falling short. For a long time, my inner voice sounded like a critic. You should be doing more. You can't handle, why can't you handle this better? But I realized I would never speak to a friend like that, like I was speaking to myself. So now when I'm struggling, I try to pause and offer myself the same kindness as if I was speaking to a friend or someone I care about. And sometimes it sounds like, this is hard, but you're doing your best. Or it makes sense that you're tired. Anyone would be. Or it's okay to move slower today. And just these sentences often soften the pressure that I put on myself. Self-compassion hasn't removed all the challenges, but it has softened the edges of them and allowed me to stay grounded instead of spiraling out all over the place. So setting boundaries. Another thing that helps me is setting practical boundaries about what I can and can't do, not only for my husband, but for myself. For a long time, I said yes automatically. Yes to every task, every need, every request, even when I was barely coping. My body always paid the price later. Now I try to check in with myself before I agree to something and ask, do I truly have the capacity for this today? And if the answer is no, I'll try to choose one of these instead of pushing through. I can't do that right now, but I can help with so-and-so, so-and-so. I want to support you, but I need to take a break first. I can only do one thing today. What is most important to you? Here's what helps me remember. A boundary isn't a wall to keep someone out. It's a pathway to stay in the relationship without burning out. Honest communication is another technique that I have. Sometimes something else that helps me is talking honestly and openly with my partner about how I'm doing, not just how he's doing. This was uncomfortable at first because I didn't want to sound like anything less than Superwoman. But when I kept everything inside, I just became resentful and overwhelmed. Now I try to share with honesty and care, especially when my pain or energy is really low. Sometimes it sounds like this: I care about you and I want to support you, but I'm in a lot of pain today, so I need to go slower. Or I'm feeling overwhelmed. Can we talk about how to make this easier for both of us? What surprised me most is that opening up didn't make things worse. It invited more understanding between us. It helped both of us remember that we're still a team, even when life is hard for each of us in different ways. My time, my space. Something that helps me protecting a small part of my day or week that belongs only to me, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. For a long time, I felt guilty taking any time for myself. Rest felt selfish. Happiness felt undeserved. When I reached a point when I realized if I never refill myself, I have nothing left to offer anyone. For me, my time doesn't look dramatic or long. Sometimes it's 10 quiet minutes with a cup of tea. Sometimes it's sitting outside for a breath of fresh air. Sometimes it's listening to music or stepping away to be still. What matters isn't what I do, just that it's mine. Protecting a small space for myself reminds me that I exist beyond the pain and the caregiving, and that I am allowed to take up space in my own life. Another technique I have is rebuilding a sense of self outside of caregiving. This is the last thing that helped me is reconnecting with who I am. I am outside of the roles of caregiver and someone who lives with pain. When caregiving becomes your whole identity, it's easy to forget the parts that you used to feel alive, curious, playful, creative, or inspired. Rebuilding my sense of self hasn't been fast or easy, but it's been essential. For me, this looks like slowly bringing back things that used to feel like me, moments of creativity, connecting with people who see me. One of the things I do, I attend the gym every morning, which is a major part of my daily routine. Saying yes to things that nourish my spirit, not just drain it. These aren't hobbies, these are lifelines that remind me I am more than the hard things I'm navigating. Reclaiming pieces of myself has helped me show up with more patience, more steadiness, and more love, both for him and for myself. In closing, I am still living with pain. I'm still caring for someone I care about. Both of these truths are still here. But the difference now is I no longer disappearing in the process. I'm learning that I can care for him and still choose myself. And I want to leave you with this. If you're living with pain and caring for someone you care about, please remember, taking care of yourself is not stepping away. It's how you stay. We are allowed to protect our strength, our joy, our identity, even when caring for others. This isn't selfish. This is courage. And it is love for them and for us. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Therese. I really appreciated the wisdom you shared and also the practicality. I was writing furiously down all of the suggestions you were giving. Just before we head over to Tanis, I just wanted to let people know that we're going to be opening the chat shortly. So that will allow folks to send in any questions that you might have for the panelists. And as just a reminder, please only post questions instead of comments. And you can give comments in the survey at the very end of the session. Okay, so now we will go along to Tanis.
Thank you, Michelle and Therese, for your lovely shares. I have lots to share in regards to what you've both said, but I don't want to take too long. So something that came up for me, Michelle, in terms of bravery and the platitudes that we often share in quickly bypassing hard feelings, is definitely a relatable thing in my work. A lot of the time when we lose someone or we're in a lot of grief, a lot of the same, excuse me, the same kind of bypassing or sweeping away of difficult feelings becomes just like a pretty standard response in society. And so I want to address that and see that, and I witness that. And despite your daughter having to be brave, that shouldn't have to be something that's put onto us. And resilience is something that I really have a hard time with. So that's for future conversations, but I see that. And Therese, thank you for bringing up creativity and all the many things that you do to take care of yourself. Some of these things are things that I bring to clients and myself to show up for clients. And the creativity is a great way to start for me, because I'm a lifelong artist and I find many ways to process my own grief and share my own work in creative ways. So let me see if I can share these slides. How's that? Is that working? Okay, great. So this is a quick bio. I will pass over this really fast. Forgive me, I'm going to do a little bit of tech stuff here. So I may have to change and not stop sharing. Anyways, on the image on the right here is a successful sticker that I made in the last few years. Cry if you need to. It's something that I bring up a lot in my own work and client work. I lost my mother about 10 years ago. It was one of the most, I've lost a lot of people, important people in my life. That one was a big one. It culminated in a lot of personal things going on in my world. And no matter the relationship you have with your parents, I think losing a parent can be something that sticks with you for life. And while I was processing a lot of the complexities of losing her and her being in pain for the most of her life, I lamented at how many tears fell while I was grieving. And one of my friends, dear friends, said, well, what if the crying is the work? And that started me on a whole new path of, right, what else have we got here in these hard feelings but to just let some tears fall? I think that brings up a lot of different subjects in terms of how we're seen and perceived in public. You don't see a lot of people crying publicly, and if we do, there's a strange response to it. And I'm here to normalize, or at least try to normalize public displays of grieving. So I believe tears and grief are essential and intrinsic parts for revolution. Nature is my sanctuary. My religion is earth, land, nature, and pain is the information that I carry inside myself now that I have my own chronic pain. Land back in liberation in our lifetime is a dream that I maintain. I am going to have to slip back into stop sharing because my computer's not allowing me to share the next slide without doing that. Hang in here for a second. This is my second slide. There we go. Yay. So some of the things that we do in death work. We're grief workers, we're end-of-life doulas, we're also death workers, birth and postpartum doulas, Some folks call themselves soul midwives. Life doulas is another term. Caretakers, food doulas, companions. I would also go so far as to say coaches, crip doulas, gender doulas. That word doula is used a lot. There's a whole history in the word. We use it as a term for caregiving. There are many more dynamic ways of using our language to describe what we do as caregivers and how we show up not only for others, but for ourselves. So this is some of the work that I do and my peers do, but we also have a lot of other roles and names for what we do. This is my next slide. So some of the things that I do for myself and my clients, as well as my own community. This isn't always paid work. Like I said before, this is community work. I think if anyone in this room wants to show up in different ways for those of us in pain or those of us who are caregiving, these are some of the things that we can elaborate on. As a doula or a caretaker, empathetic listening is like number one. That's something that we learn in counseling and peer support and showing up for others, showing up in pain. Empathy is such a potent tool, not only to share with others and how we speak in regards to hearing others' stories, but how we show up for ourselves and how we listen. I'll go through these points really quickly. A lot of the things that we do in terms of navigating hope, future planning, legacy, what does the future of us look like? And that can become, again, really complex with pain, but I encourage folks to even look into the next day or the next week, holding goals, making sure that we have something to look forward to. Those of us in this work, we can organize for you. We can create routines that can also include on the right side of this slide, rituals, ceremony, practices that need us to show up in small ways on a regular basis can sometimes offer solace to the jagged edges of pain. Advocacy, so a lot of our work as well is speaking on behalf of those of us in pain or speaking on behalf of our clients. And I really want to make sure that we're speaking on behalf of other caregivers as well. As Michelle mentioned, a lot of the time we are, as parents especially, or children of elderly family members, we underestimate our role as a caregiver. And that's a really incredibly tender and special spot in society too. So online virtual support, mentorships and skills training, those are all things that are a vast resource online, which I'd love to share more about too. Peer support and just showing up for one another in ways that don't expend our spoons and don't burn us out. And of course, this is all supporting burnout. These are small but large things. I wanted to share a quick quote I just saw on social media this morning, and it was the many micro joys counter the macro griefs. So a lot of the time I will say the small things are big things. Those are big things. We often show up for folks in postpartum places and in grief spaces, and we show up with the things that we're commonly that are common, meal trains, meeting spaces, gatherings, caregiving with groceries and errands, chores, and housework. I encourage those things in group projects because a lot of us can't carry all of that solely, but small little things could work out into team efforts. Those are also some of the other things that I can organize and that we do in this work. We also facilitate future death work and talk about the uncomfortable stuff. And those spaces are really welcome for people in pain because we need more spaces for those conversations. spiritual, philosophical support and education and community connection. Those are all either things that we need to find more of and grow resources within, or continue to practice. So that's just a myriad of the things that we provide. So I encourage those of us in pain and those of us that are caregiving to go and find these folks. I don't be scared of the word death doula, because these folks are some of the most well-equipped people for this kind of stuff, this kind of hard stuff that we carry. The overlap of, as I mentioned before, the systemic issues around vulnerable populations that most of us are caregiving impact caregivers. And so there's that overlap of grief care and caregiving needs. So as I'm saying, all of these things are practices that we share with clients in grief spaces and end-of-life spaces. They apply across the board for folks who are in queer communities, in pain communities, all sorts of these little corners around the world. They all overlap and they all have these tender places where we can support one another. So just a quick little link list of really brief overview. About Grief is an incredible resource. It goes through the Canadian Virtual Hospice. That is all online. There are so many little rabbit holes you can find yourself lost in these websites. The End of Life Doula Association of Canada can be a starting point for learning who in your neighborhood is a certified doula, end of life doula. Now, a lot of this stuff is for paid work. There are a ton of free resources within this because a lot of death workers know that the people that need this care the most are the most vulnerable. These are the communities that can't afford and don't have the privileges to access this stuff. While that's wonderful that we have clients that do, for example, for my work, any paid work, I put a percentage of that towards a community fund so I can continue to do unpaid work in this realm. Many of my peers do this as well, and you will find, again, online resources to the hilt of all sorts of different overlaps. I added this queer grief club on through Instagram just as an example. They're having a virtual discussion on chronic illness and grief today. So if you want to do some searching online and look for something fun to do and meet some new people, it's a safe space. I haven't been there personally, but I know these people and I'm very familiar with their work. And again, other community groups. COVID considerate groups. This is where I come from, as I mentioned, with a ongoing pandemic. COVID considerate folks are some of the most caring, community-minded people I've ever met online, the strangers on the internet that do the most to take care of one another. Chronic illness groups as well as peer support groups. For example, through Pain Canada, there are some incredible support groups where we can show up for one another and just be real about what we're dealing with and not feel shunned or turned away or ignored or bypassed or minimized or even just faced with these nonsense platitudes that we deal with on a regular basis when it comes to grieving and pain. I just wanted to add tomorrow as an example of something I also do creatively. I had the honor of creating a digital story. It's playing on Tuesday during this conference. I've had the honor of this beautiful cohort. So I just wanted to share that. It's called Sprout Vulnerably. It speaks to the land-based and ancestral practices that I've been adapting for myself to do this work. So it's just a little snippet of creativity and an example of some of the things that I want to share in this world with what I do. And yeah, like I was mentioning, peer support, social connections. This is a really wonderful space as well that you can find yourself this week too. And I encourage you all. This is a beautiful community of people who know what it's like to be in pain. So thank you for listening to me. Let me see if I can stop share.
Thank you, Tanis. Um, Lovely. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate you all sharing. And I know I can see in the chat that there are lots of questions. I don't think we're going to have time to get to all of them. However, I am just checking in with kind of the back end of our Zoom event to see if there's any way that you can message the speakers directly and ask questions afterwards, because we won't be able to get to all of your wonderful questions. And I do appreciate everybody being so willing to engage in these discussions. So one thing that I'm gonna just grab one question that maybe all of you can answer. Um, do do either anyone on the panel have any words as a caregiver to balance giving some positive words of how well somebody is doing while not forcing that someone into the be brave kind of for me? And just a comment, like I found this balance can be hard between listening and letting someone spiral into the pain. Michelle.
I can comment quickly. So my mother was just diagnosed with trigeminal neuralgia, which is a very, very intense type of pain, and she is spiraling right now. So I'm balancing this. Sometimes she wants a distraction, humor, funny. Sometimes there's a practical thing, like do you have a neurologist? Do you have your GP? What medications? So it's really, and then sometimes she just wants to be validated. Like, yeah, that sucks really bad. So it's about seeing where that person is at one day. Sometimes I do let her spiral a bit, but not too much because it's hard for her to get out of it. So it's really about seeing where she's at and what might be the best strategy.
Thanks, Michelle. Therese or Tanis, do you have any quick thoughts to share?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's meeting people where they're at. Ask them, do you know what you need? Is there anything I can do? And not trying to force them to be brave. That's people don't understand chronicity. That's the thing. They expect you to get better, and when you're not, it's them really that can't handle it. But yeah, it's just meeting people where they're at and just finding if there's anything you can do on a personal level.
Thanks, Therese. Tanis, any last minute quick thoughts?
Oh yeah, just hearing and seeing what someone's going through and just reflecting that back can be an incredibly potent support, just to be able to witness what someone is feeling and going through and putting words to that in a witnessed way. Yeah, that we don't need to fix people. We don't need to show up with solutions and fix it. What's really crucial here is to just sit in that discomfort for yourself and be able to be okay with it and not have that person needing to placate you in your own discomfort. They're already there. So just being able to sit with that and recognize what someone's going through can be enough in those moments.
Lovely. Thanks, Tanis. So unfortunately, like I said, I know that there were such awesome questions in the chat, but given that we want to try and keep on schedule here, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Therese, Tanis, and Michelle, for sharing your stories and your perspectives and your techniques and strategies.